What's up, guys? We had a 1-1 night last night for a slight loss. Not happy about it, really. The hockey game, Edmonton, that looks worse than it actually was, really. Statistically, Edmonton outshot Dallas, although, of course, part of it was because they were losing badly by the time the third period started. But that was a 1-0 game pretty late in the second period, and Dallas scored 4 goals in a 7-minute span, basically to end the second period. There's just no coming back from that. And Edmonton was the more physical team, too. Both of those teams considered to be more like high scoring, kind of finesse type of teams, but even more so is the case with Dallas, especially last night. So final score maybe a little bit misleading, but it was a loss. And in the afternoon, we won on the Minnesota Twins. Not afraid to go back to the well on that one with the Twins. The starting pitching matchup wasn't really that much of a mismatch. I mean, it was actually kind of probably, it wound up in favor of Milwaukee a little bit, but the bullpen scenario was really what put it over the top there. Milwaukee, not in a good bullpen situation there. Moving on to today, we do have the NIT final, which I'm not getting involved in this, but maybe it'll be a fun game to watch because it is a game of contrasting styles, and it's between two teams that maybe debatably should have gotten into the actual tournament that were on the bubble there in Indiana State and Seton Hall. Indiana State's up to 3.5 from 3 with juice, up to 3.5, 59% of the cash, 57% of the tickets. Indiana State looks like they are getting some of the money coming in on them a little bit and are also slightly public, which makes sense because they're the better offense out of these two teams, and public likes offense. So if the public is looking to play college basketball tonight, this is the only thing on the board. They're probably going to gravitate towards the offense of Indiana State, and the game is in Indianapolis, so kind of like a semi-home situation for Indiana State almost, but I wouldn't be so sure about that because you do have Seton Hall, who are the better defense, getting points in the game. And you know that tends to be the way that I like to look in games like this. This one, the market read looks a little bit against that to me, but I think the line's a little bit too high on Indiana State too, because the odds makers, I think, they're giving Indiana State a little bit more because it's in Indiana. Maybe they're giving them a little bit more of a bump just because they're the better offense and they know they have to skew the line a little bit in their direction. So I don't think you're getting any value on Indiana State if you're playing it at that number, but they are certainly the better offense. They are in Indiana, so they're probably going to have more of a home crowd. They may be the team with a little bit more of something to prove here, potentially. But they're kind of the more popular team, the team that everybody likes and I think is kind of rooting for there. So I don't know, it's a little bit tough. My slight lean would be to Seton Hall, though, to take the defense there and go against the market read there, but definitely not doing that one. I'm skipping the NHL card, even though it's a decent-sized card. You got a lot of, somewhat substantial favorites. A couple of interesting games. Pittsburgh and Washington is interesting. Both of those teams actually still somehow in the hunt for the wild card there. So that's kind of interesting. And then I don't like Columbus, although the line looks like it's gone down on the New York Islanders, and the Islanders are still a big public road favorite. So I just don't want to get involved in that, even though I would lean to the Islanders there because Columbus just beat the Avalanche. That's a big win. Columbus doesn't really have anything to play for. I mean, they're an eliminated team. I mean, if they want to play the role of spoiler, yeah, sure. But the Islanders still are alive in the wild card. So they're the team that has the motivation there, but you're paying kind of a ridiculous price to play them. And it has gone down a little bit, even though it looks like the Islanders do have the cash discrepancy, 82% of the cash and 80% of the tickets. So they are a public road favorite as well of decent size. So no thanks on that one. And then Colorado, Minnesota, I guess maybe a little bit interesting. Colorado maybe in a bounce back off of the ugly loss to Columbus, which I think was their previous game. Colorado has already clinched a playoff spot, though. So they're playing for kind of seeding at this point, but they're almost like guaranteed the 2 seed in the Central now, though, because Dallas with the win last night is 5 points ahead of them, and they're 4 points ahead of Winnipeg, who's been kind of sliding a little bit, although so is Colorado. But Colorado, they're getting close to being locked into that position for the playoffs. So they might have a little bit less motivation than a Minnesota team that's fighting for their playoff lives there and isn't quite eliminated yet, but could be soon, but they're not. So they do still have something to play for there. So that's an interesting one. And then Nashville is playing Who's Nashville playing? St. Louis? Yeah, that's an interesting one too. Nashville up in the top wild card right now, 6 points ahead of St. Louis. St. Louis is 5 points out of the final wild card spot right now. So that's an interesting one. Both those teams fighting for the wild card, with St. Louis definitely in more of a desperate situation than Nashville is. Nashville kind of a big home favorite and moving up a little bit there. And Colorado, a big road favorite, public road favorite. Looks like they've gone down on the money line a little bit. And Nashville also a public home favorite there. So I would slightly lean to Minnesota and St. Louis in those, just because I think those are the teams they're getting like a big underdog price, and you know that you're probably going to get an effort out of those two teams trying to stay alive. So at an underdog price with a team that you know you're getting effort, I would kind of look in their direction, maybe find some way to play them, maybe even on the puck line or something, but not doing either of those. We'll go to the NBA. We have a short card in the NBA, which means you can kind of focus in on some spots here and find some spots, find a couple of games. I'm going with two games that both look like kind of sandwiches to me in a way, even though both games do involve two teams that are still both going to have motivation in a way, because they're both still fighting for playoff positioning or to even get into the playoffs. The first one, I'm going to be on the New York Knicks hosting the Sacramento Kings. The Knicks up from 3 to 3.5, 59% of the tickets on them, but 94% of the cash. So when you see like cash percentages in the 90s on pregame, I don't think that that's exactly accurate. I think that's really kind of ludicrous, and like the books would have to like do something to, I mean, you do see that this line has moved up on the Knicks though. So I do believe that they are getting a majority of the cash, more so than what they have in the amount of tickets. So I do think there is a cash discrepancy on them. And I do think the books are having to move the line a little bit on them. I just think that that number is a bit exaggerated, but I still think it can kind of give you a gauge on what the betting market looks like in that particular game. And I do think that the Knicks are getting, maybe the slight majority of the tickets, as this tells you, but more of the cash and the tickets, and the line is moving up on them, which kind of tells you that. But if you look at the situation, I mean, both of these teams are fighting for playoff seeding essentially at this point. Sacramento, they're going to be in the playoffs. It's just a matter of where they're going to be. And yes, they're fighting to avoid the play-in, which that is definitely a motivator for sure. They're only a half game behind Phoenix, who are in the 6th spot in the last of the non-play-in positions, or Sacramento's sitting a half game behind them in the 8th spot. So a lot of different things could happen here. But looking at Sacramento, I just think you got to ask yourself, like, what are they going to have in the tank for this game specifically? Looking at what they've done in their recent games here, they've had a stretch where they played a bunch of big games. Going back to when they beat Philadelphia on the 25th. I mean, they've had a decent amount of days off in this stretch too, but they played a lot of tough games, losing twice to Dallas, one a just monstrous blow up. And then the other one, a game that I lost on, where I thought it was a nice zigzag spot after that horrific blowout. And they blew a decent sized 4th quarter lead in the second game and lost again. Brutal for betting purposes there, and for Sacramento as a team. They still had a nice game after that against a Utah team that looks like they may have kind of given up. Then in their most recent game 2 days ago, they're coming off a game where they beat the LA Clippers by 14. Now they're going out on the road, and yes, they are starting a road trip, and they do have motivation as far as trying to avoid the play-in. Yes, that's true. They're going to be motivated. Usually you do get a motivated team on a first game on the road on a road trip, but they are coming off such a monster win over a Western Conference foe in LA. That's a huge win. They might be feeling a little bit high right now with only 1 day off and having to travel from coast to coast almost. I don't think that's the best spot, really, having to travel cross country with only 1 day off, coming off a big win over the Clippers. They got the Knicks, who play kind of an ugly brand of basketball, even though, yes, they did lose at home to the Knicks back on March 16th. So is there going to be like a little bit of a revenge motive? I'm not so sure, just because I think the spot is just not great for Sacramento here. And they do have Boston tomorrow. So this game does kind of look like a sandwich to me, even though does a sandwich really apply when you have a team that's fighting for playoff positioning and fighting to avoid the play-ins, which is kind of important. Yeah, but they do have a bunch of games left on their card, and they do have some easier games like Brooklyn and Portland on the schedule as well. They do have some bigger Western Conference teams up as well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the market looks like it is on the Knicks here, so I'm going to be on the Knicks as well, just because I think the Knicks are in more of the bounce back spot, and Sacramento's in more of a tough spot here with this game sandwiched in between two big opponents. And it could be a game where they just maybe lack a little bit of energy with the travel spot that they're in. The fact that they're coming off such a huge win like that, where the Knicks, they're on a 3-game losing streak, man, and it's not a great one either, really. I mean, they lost to Sacramento, or excuse me, not Sacramento. They're playing Sacramento tonight. Oh God, I hope I didn't jinx the whole game there. Maybe I jinxed it in the right way there. No, they lost to San Antonio on the 29th. Overtime. That's ugly, man. And then they were not quite able to bounce back off of that. I had them in the game after that against Oklahoma City, and they lost on the final possession of that game. SGA actually came back for that game, and then I think he was out again for Oklahoma City, and the Knicks weren't quite able to do it, losing by 1. And then in their most recent game, also on Tuesday, they had a weird single road game down in Miami. Didn't play well in that one, really, and lost by double digits, losing to Miami. So now I think the Knicks are going to be in a bounce back spot here. And if you look at what they have up next, they have a road trip that starts tomorrow, and almost all the rest of their games are on the road. 4 of the remaining 6 games are on the road. And I think their last 2 home games are both games where they know they're going to be favorites. They do have 2 of these road games. They're both against Chicago. They're playing Chicago 3 times in the last 6 games, which is weird. That's kind of weird for playoff purposes as well, really, because that's a situation where Chicago's locked into the play-ins, though, so Chicago's not really going to have that much to play for us. And the Knicks have a decent look to their remaining schedule, but I think the Knicks are going to be motivated here too, because they're coming off a loss to Miami. I mean, Miami was able to jump, they were able to leap above Indiana and get out of the play-in spots for now. The Knicks are only 2 games ahead of Miami right now after that, and the Knicks are still could potentially move up to the 4 or the 3. They're only a half game behind the Magic, and that I think matters as well, because if you get into the 4 seed, you're going to host a playoff series in the first playoff series. So there is motivation on both sides here. I just like the spot for the Knicks better, where they're staying on the East Coast. Sacramento's having to travel cross country and coming off a huge win and have a really big opponent next too. Whereas the Knicks, I mean, even though, yes, both teams in general are going to want to win this game, the Knicks are in more of like a bounce back scenario here. And the market looks like it is agreeing with that. So I'll be on the Knicks. Then I will also be on the Houston Rockets, although it looks like the Warriors have gone up from 3 to 4. It's like, yeah, let's just get a little bit of additional value here. You can get the Houston Rockets at 4. This looks like a pros versus Joes situation now, as the public seems to be off the Rockets hype train after they've lost 2 games now. They had won 11 games in a row and got to within 1 game of these Golden State Warriors, and now they've lost 2 in a row, and they've fallen to 3 games behind. And it looks like, as I said, this could be the end of the road for the Rockets. And unfortunately, I missed on the Minnesota T-Wolves against the Rockets in what I thought was the hangover spot. Missed by 1 point in that game. Minnesota had a 15-point lead with 6 minutes left, and were only able to win by 7. That's a brutal way to lose that bet, too. I hate when those things happen, man. Golden State here has 68% of the tickets. 52% of the cash looks like it's on the other side, on the home underdog Houston Rockets here. So it does look like there is a cash discrepancy with the cash on the underdog Houston Rockets and home, and the majority of the tickets on the other side on the Warriors. The Warriors, they're almost locked into one of the play-in games of this. Well, yeah, pretty much. I would say they're locked into one of the play-in games, but even though they are 3.5 games out of the 6th spot behind Phoenix, but I think it's unlikely they're going to be able to avoid the play-ins. But I think at this point, they're also feeling probably like they're sitting pretty comfortably above Houston at this point. 3-game lead over Houston now. Houston probably not going to be able to do it. So Golden State, it's possible they might take their foot off the gas just a little bit here. And this spot, I don't think is very good for them. I think this could be a sandwich type of spot as well, where Golden State, they've won 5 games in a row, but 3 of those, well, I mean, one was at Orlando. Winning at Miami and Orlando, yeah, okay, those are fine wins. Those are pretty good wins. But then they won at Charlotte and at San Antonio, barely. That's not really that impressive. They returned home, and I thought they were in a bad return home spot. And unfortunately, they beat Dallas. Dallas made a nice comeback late in that game. It was close. The game was tied in the final, like a couple minutes of that game, I think. And Golden State was just able to outlast Dallas in that one and win. Another big win for Golden State. Now they go out on the road for a 2-game road stint, and they have Dallas up next again tomorrow. So this kind of looks like a Dallas Maverick sandwich there to me. I don't know what cowboys in Texas eat for sandwiches. Maybe some barbecue, something like that. I don't know what they eat, but that's the sandwich that the Warriors are in here. Will they overlook Houston in this spot? Maybe a little bit, just because I think Houston, even though Houston did give them a little bit of a scare there, it almost feels like the storm is kind of over and that Golden State has kind of weathered the storm here now and won 5 in a row. Houston's lost 2 in a row. It's like Golden State, it feels like they could almost maybe ease up a little bit in this spot. Not the greatest spot here. Whereas for Houston, you're getting a team that's like in desperation mode now and in a bounce back spot, and you're getting points at home with them. So I like that more. Houston, the hype train kind of over. And one of their losses that they had, the loss that broke their entire win streak, was to Dallas. So I think people are going to look at this and think, well, wait a minute. If Houston loses by almost 20 to Dallas and Golden State just beat Dallas, well, then you got to play Golden State here, right? It's easy. Golden State beat Dallas, who just blew out Houston. So, of course, Golden State will be able to beat Houston by a couple buckets, right? Golden State, they're the better team. I mean, everybody knows that Golden State has like those stars on their team. So, I mean, that is the way the public is going to look here. But I think it could be a little bit different. And then Houston, of course, they're coming off that second loss where they went to Minnesota. It was an odd travel spot, I will say, having to go on that single road game to Minnesota as well. And Minnesota, it was a spot where Minnesota, I think, should have gotten there for me, and they didn't do it. Now Houston's coming back off of that. I think this might be more of a bounce back spot for them now. They're catching points at home now. Playing Houston in the underdog role, I think, is a little bit better. And Houston also has a big home road dichotomy. So even though I did win on them, on the road a little while ago at Oklahoma City, Houston at home is a lot better as well. So they're one of the bigger home road dichotomies in the NBA. I think it's them and Orlando. They both have huge home road dichotomies. So I like this one for Houston, man. So I'm going to be doing that on the Houston Rockets +4. Then we'll move to Major League Baseball. This is one of those small Thursday Major League Baseball cards where that allows you to kind of focus in. And this is a spot where the 2 games I'm going to be on today don't really have to do with the pitching matchups, where the pitching matchups are really pitching matchups where it's like all of these starters have reasons to avoid them. But it's more of a scheduling dynamic type of spot when you get into these Major League Baseball days where you have teams that are like changing series basically and starting new series. Then you kind of get these scheduling situations where you have to look at where what is this team coming off of? What did they just do in their last series versus what this other team did in their last series? So it's more of a scheduling dynamic type of day on these days where you cross over into different series in the MLB, which usually tends to be on Thursdays and Mondays primarily. And those tend to be the days where you get fewer baseball games on the card too. So it kind of lets you focus into. So I do have 2 baseball plays today, and they're going to be on bad pitchers, man. One of them up in the afternoon in the National League. We'll talk about this game first. I'm going to take the Miami Marlins. Oh no. I think I've been on them once this year and lost on them. I've been against them once or twice too and won. Miami is 0-7 to start the season. I'm taking them +130, by the way. They're 0-7 to start the season, man, and lost all 7 of those games at home. No bettor who's betting baseball, no like recreational bettor is going to come in and want to take Miami after that start. 0-7, but I think you're getting value on Miami now just because of their horrific start. They're not that bad. I mean, this is a team who was in the playoffs last year. I don't know if they're going to be a playoff team this year, but they're not as bad as they look. St. Louis in this game is down from -155 to -147, excuse me. So it looks like there is money coming in against St. Louis. They're public as well with 83% of the tickets. This is saying on pregame they have 87% of the cash. So saying they have the cash discrepancy, I don't think that's actually the case because the money line looks like it's moved significantly against St. Louis there. And yeah, this is a spot where Ryan Weathers is pitching for. Miami, he's a guy, I talked about how bad his numbers are when I went against him in his last start. That is all true. His stats versus St. Louis, I think, are not remarkable either. They're 4 for 16 off him for a 250 batting average. I mean, there's not much to glean from that. It's a small sample size. It's just mediocre numbers on both sides. Yes, I've talked about how bad Weathers' stats are. Yeah, I mean, none of his stats are very good at all in his career, but he is still only 24. He is still a young guy. And is he going to maybe have a bounce back type of spot here because he had a really bad game in his first game against Pittsburgh? Possibly. You might get a little bit of value on him. He is at least the younger pitcher, and his stats aren't that horrendous against St. Louis. So, yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that this is kind of a wash here as far as the pitchers are concerned. You could even maybe argue that Weathers is the better way to go in this pitching matchup because Weathers is way younger than Lance Lynn, who's an old journeyman pitcher now, who has now returned to his original team, St. Louis. But in the last couple seasons, Lynn has had a noticeable drop off in his stats, where he had one bad year mixed in there in the earlier parts of his career, but his stats have been bad the last couple of years. Miami has seen him a lot more. They've seen him 106 at bats worth, so they're very familiar with him because he's been around forever. They're 26 for 106 off him. Their batters are, which is a 245 batting average. So not that much to glean from the starting pitching matchup, really. You can't really. I mean, you could argue that Weathers actually has a little bit of an edge here because he's a little bit more of the unknown pitcher. The stats, other than that, are kind of the same against the opposing hitters. Just that Miami has way more history against Lance Lynn, so they're much more familiar with Lance Lynn, and Lance Lynn is the way older pitcher. So debatably, Weathers would be actually maybe have the slight edge here. And Lance Lynn is coming off a shutout performance in a game where his team won over the Dodgers, although he didn't get a win. That was still a big performance against the Dodgers. He only went 4 innings, though, and they took him out after 70 pitches. That tells you, I don't know, are they easing him into the season, or can this guy just not go deep into games anymore? I'm not quite sure about that, but also you look at what are these teams coming off of. This is the scheduling dynamic thing, man. Miami has lost 7 straight games at home. Now they get to go out on the road and just put that all aside. So I think that's a good spot for Miami, man, to be able to just leave that all behind and go out on the road. You just had a horrific couple series to open the season at home. The best thing for a team when they're in a spot like that, I think, is to just go out on the road, leave all that negative energy behind. Don't, read what the press is saying about you. Just forget about that. Just go out on the road and focus on playing baseball. So I think that tends to be a good spot in these sports. Miami also kind of saved their bullpen yesterday after Puke only pitched 4 innings. They only used 2 relievers for the remaining 5 innings. So their bullpen is really not in terrible shape here. Whereas St. Louis was in a battle in a later game last night too against San Diego at San Diego. And St. Louis had to use 3 relievers, still not that many, but their bullpen might be at a slight disadvantage because of that. And I think their scheduling dynamic spot is a lot worse as well because St. Louis, they're returning home. This is going to be their home opener, so you could argue that's going to give them motivation, but they're playing an 0-17, man, and they're returning from the West Coast. They were out for 2 series on the West Coast. They only went 3-4, but they played 2 tough teams out on the West Coast, and the Dodgers and the Padres, who were probably the best 2 teams in the NL West, I would say. Sorry to the Giants fans. Well, actually, the Diamondbacks are out there. Excuse me, I forgot about sorry to the Diamondbacks fans. Actually, the Diamondbacks are actually probably better than the Padres, but we'll see, I guess. But St. Louis in that return home spot, I don't think it's a good spot for them. So we'll make a play on Miami at an underdog price there. I think you're getting value there. And then the other play, an even bigger underdog coming in on the Chicago White Sox at plus 145. I kind of like this one too for somewhat similar reasons. Kansas City's up from minus 160 to minus 167. When is Kansas City ever that substantial a favorite? The Royals, who are they to be laying a price like that against anyone, really? Even though the White Sox are awful, Kansas City is also not good. I mean, we don't know because it's early, but you got to think that neither of these teams are very good. Yet again, 82% of the tickets on Kansas City and 89% of the cash. So it does look like the money line and the money is coming in a little bit on Kansas City, but I don't agree with that. They're public as well, but it looks like they're moving up on that line a little bit, but I don't like what's going on with Kansas City here, man. I would prefer to be on Chicago here for a couple of reasons. Looking at the starting pitching matchup first, I guess you got Soroka pitching for the Chicago White Sox. For the White Sox, excuse me. Yeah, he was on the Braves. I think this might be his first year with the White Sox. I'd have to look. Kansas City has not faced him much. Neither of these pitchers are very familiar to the opposing hitters. Kansas City's 2 for 8 off of Soroka lifetime. Only 3 batters have ever seen him. Not much you can glean from that. His career stats aren't really that bad. Although he's only had 1 full season in 2019. He's still pretty young, 26, but I don't know, since the COVID lockdown seasons or whatever, he really hasn't pitched that much, which makes me hesitate a little bit, but he does have a game under his belt already this year. He did make 6 starts last year, although last year was his really bad season. His other seasons weren't as bad, although his whip has been kind of questionable. But in his longest season, he actually had decent stats with the Braves. In the 1 full season that he had, his whip was actually pretty low. He kept his walk numbers down. He's not really a strikeout guy, but he was able to keep the hits allowed down and put up okay stats there. So I think I prefer Soroka here, the younger of the 2 pitchers here. He is coming off not a great game where his team lost to Detroit. He gave up 4 runs in that game and only threw 77 pitches. They took him out after 5 innings. Didn't have a great start, so gets that start out of the way. Is he going to bounce back a little bit? Maybe. He's up against Seth Lugo, who's been in the league for much longer. Lugo's 34 now, so I like taking these younger pitchers a lot of times in spots like this. Lugo, his career stats are a bit better, yeah, and there is more of a sample size there, but since 2020, he's had kind of a bit of a drop-off as well, although the 2020 season was a lot worse than the other seasons that he had, but he was also a reliever primarily after 2017 when he had a basically he was a starter for a decent portion of the 2017 season with the Mets, who he's played for most of his career. He then became a reliever for most of his career after that and didn't become a starter again until last year. He actually had his most full season as a starter. And yeah, his numbers were actually pretty decent. He had decent strikeout numbers, really decent whip, decent ERA. Not bad, really. But he is kind of an old pitcher at this point. I mean, his stats, they're fine, but not necessarily anything that I'm going to be like, oh, I love this guy's stats. But overall, yeah, I mean, his strikeout numbers on his career are pretty good, and his whip also pretty good in the 1.1s, and ERA down as well. But a lot of that was as a reliever, man. So it's like, if you look at his stats as a starter, they are not quite as good as they are as a reliever. The one thing that would give me a little bit of pause, I guess, is that, he's up against, who is he up against here? The Chicago White Sox. The American League hasn't really seen him much. White Sox are actually 0 for 12 off him, so very small sample size, though they've had only 4 guys face him before, so that gives me pause too, but neither of these starting pitchers are very familiar to the opposing hitter, so I don't think there's that much of an edge there, and I think the scheduling dynamics are where you get the edge on the White Sox here, because the White Sox actually didn't play yesterday, so I think that gives them a little bit of an advantage to rest their bullpen. They get to go out on the road now and start a road trip, which tends to be a focus spot as well. Yes, they were coming off their first win of the season, which was a big win over the Atlanta Braves. That's true. So does that mean they're going to be in a letdown spot? I don't really think so, because I think it could be more of like a momentum spot, because they finally got that win to break that negative energy where they hadn't won a game on the season yet. They get a day off now, and they get to go out on the road. So the day off allows them to get their bullpen in better shape. I think their bullpen is going to be in the much better position here. Scheduling-wise, I think they're in the better spot too. And starting a road trip, I think you're going to be focused to start the road trip. So I like their spot better than Kansas City's. Kansas City, they did have to play yesterday, and they were at Baltimore, which is a tough series. There was a rain delay in the game. The game wound up ending, I think, a bit later than they wanted it to. So they played a late game yesterday where the Chicago was just didn't have to play yesterday. And the way Kansas City lost that game was brutal. They were beating the Baltimore Orioles, who are probably one of the better teams in the American League. They were beating them 3-0 into the 8th inning and gave up 4 runs across the 8th and 9th inning and lost on a walk-off in the 9th inning. Even though they out-hit the Orioles in that game, they had a 3-0 lead in the 8th. That's a brutal, brutal way to lose that game for Kansas City, man. So I think they might be in a hangover spot coming off that. It was a game that went later than they wanted to, and they have to travel off of that. That is brutal. And because they were in a situation where they had the lead in the late innings, I think they had to use like some of their best relievers, kind of like their top 3 relievers, the back end of their bullpen. So their bullpen is in much worse shape than Chicago's is, with Chicago not even playing yesterday, and Kansas City playing a tough game against Baltimore and losing in kind of the most brutal way imaginable. And now Kansas City's coming off that and returning home from Baltimore. So it's also a return home spot with no days off, which could be a little bit of a distracted spot too. Not a good spot for Kansas City, man. A spot where they're laying a price like this, where there's not that much of an edge in the starting pitching matchup. In my opinion, the bullpen advantage and rest advantage and travel advantage, I think all has to go to the White Sox. All the scheduling dynamic edges have to go to the White Sox here. So that's going to be it for me, man. That's what I'm doing. So in baseball today, Miami Marlins, no, plus 130. Chicago White Sox, plus 145. Nice underdog prices there. And in NBA, New York Knicks, minus 3.5. Houston Rockets, plus 4. That's the card today. Let's do it. Let's hope we win. Peace.